says we are being recorded. And now I'm going to go to share my screen. Now you'll have an opportunity for questions at the end, so I'll hold on to those and you can put them in the chat area, and I'll come back to that after I do the presentation. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And now we're going to start with Data 610 course overview. Now, since this is your first course, I hope all of you, or at least almost all of you, got to see or attend the orientation. There were some tips there on how to succeed in the program, so I'm not going to go back through those. What I want to get into tonight is a little more detail about exactly what is entailed in the 610 course. So having said that, let me go ahead and start. Excuse me. Here's my agenda for the evening. And I'm going to do two presentations, by the way. You should keep your computers on mute, and you should keep your videos turned off. I'm going to do two presentations. I'm going to go through the course. Then I'm going to provide a little more information about the decision traps and biases. We know that we have them, and so it's a good place to start. So we'll get to that second. The whole thing should take maybe a little over an hour, and then you can move ahead back to football or whatever. Okay, introductions. If you post a little something about your bio, it helps, because then I can sort of tailor some of the extra links, some of the extra discussion areas, et cetera, et cetera. If you want to put a little something in there, it gives me a feel for the background. Some of you, I'm sure, have a more extensive background in analytics than others. So it helps me if I can see sort of an overview of what people are doing and what their background is. Certainly you want to make sure your email address that's in Leo is your current email address, because sometimes we have to send emails. And then again, if you want to see some interest, post something of your interest if you'd like to see additional information. Okay, on to the main course itself. When we put this program together, we focused on combining two things: decision making and analytics. More and more, as I've said before to many people at open houses or at the orientation, we're finding that employers and everybody else says you've got to be more than just a quantitative number cruncher to be a good data scientist. You've got to be able to know what will help make the organization run better. So the focus on decision making and analytics combined is important. So that led us in this first course to come up with an outline to get you started in the program of three major themes: framing a decision, which means outlining what it is, why it's important, what kinds of resources you need, who's going to do what and where; analyzing or making the decision. In other words, this is where you build the model or the analytics approach to do that. And then finally, implementing, which is where you have to explain / sell / operationalize this. This comes right out of a book that we have been using in this course. We're no longer using textbooks, as you know, but it's called Keeping Up with Your Quants by Tom Davenport. And so we're still using a lot of his information, a lot of links to his online readings. We're just not using his textbook. But I thought it was ideal for what we're trying to do in Data 610, and it is. A second key point. As you know, we are redesigning almost all of UMUC's programs to be what we call competency-based. Well, the good news is the MSDA program was the first, and we started out to make it a competency-based when we put it together in the spring of, well, we started in spring of 2014. We were putting it together in the fall of 2013. So it's a competency-based program, MSDA. What does that mean? Well, it means that your assignments are based on what you can do, not what you know. Now, certainly you have to know something to be able to do something, but basically we're looking at your ability to do things. It's nice to know a lot about analytics. It's more important to be able to do something with analytics, especially if it affects decision-making and the bottom line. It also means that by the time you finish the MSDA program, having this same competency-based approach in every course, you should have a fairly robust portfolio of things you've done that you could show a prospective employer or current employer and say, listen, I know what I'm talking about. Here's what I've done. That means the assignments are fewer in number. You will notice if you've looked at the syllabus, there aren't assignments due every single week, because if you're going to be based on competencies, doing things, those take a little bit longer. You're not just writing a paper, you're not just critiquing a case, you're doing something and so forth. So there's going to be a lot of practicing and false starts and redos, and that's part of getting good at doing things. Okay, so the weeks between assignments where you don't have a specific assignment to do, we try to put activities in. Activities are things that you should do. They're not graded, but doing them will certainly enhance your chances of success because they're designed to sort of move you along towards succeeding when you get to the graded assignments. They're opportunities. They're things you should look forward to, but be sure to do them. As we said in the orientation, the key to success in this course and all the courses is putting in the requisite time and doing what's expected. In other words, 15 to 20 hours per week. Let me back up to that. Okay. As most of you know, we now have such a demand in our program that we're actually starting 6 sections of Data 610 this semester. A couple of them, 9081 and 9082, start in with a 2-week lag to allow for latecomers to sign up, but we actually have 4 sections up and running as of today, 4.0, 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3. I, of course, have 4.0, and I am the lead professor for this course. I try to keep all of us on the same page with the same information, so everybody's using the model course that I developed, but they will make some slight alterations section by section, and we'll keep everybody on the same page. So these are your instructors, and by now I'm sure you know who yours is. We do have 2 hands-on software packages that we use in this course. One is called Decisions First. I would be very surprised if anyone out there had ever heard of or used this program before, but having said that, let me say that I think it's outstanding for what it does. As I mentioned, our first major theme for the program and the course is being able to correctly and properly and thoroughly frame a decision to be made. So Decisions First is exactly the best program to do that. I think you'll agree with me after you use it that it does that well. It won't build you analytical models. It won't help you implement the answers, but it will help you do that very important first thing, the framing. And before I forget, I should mention there will be, first of all, there'll be a walkthrough of Decisions First upcoming this week. You'll be receiving a notice to that, and again, that'll be recorded if you can't attend live. There are also already many videos and walkthroughs and tutorials out there that the proprietor of the software, Mr. James Taylor, created, so you'll have his videos available on demand as well as mine. Finally, you'll see highlighted in blue there, your password and access will be provided. So don't sign yourself up for either software package. We will take care of that. You will receive from your faculty member, if you haven't already, your password and login for Decisions First. You should get that certainly early on this week. And I should have mentioned these are cloud-based programs, so they're accessed directly from the vendor site. The good news is you don't really have to install much or anything to make them work. The bad news, or the warning news, I guess, would be that occasionally, the cloud goes down and you're unable to get to the software. And of course, we accommodate anything that's beyond your control. But don't be one of people who delay till the absolute last minute, late Sunday afternoon, to try to get into the software. Sometimes that causes a glitch, or sometimes those software vendors are doing periodic maintenance. So just a word of warning. The second software package we're using is called Watson Analytics from IBM. Most of you, I would assume, have heard of Watson software, which is quite good. It won the Jeopardy Challenge. It's used in hospitals, financial institutions. It's probably one of the most amazing software packages ever developed. Well, we're not using that Watson, but we are using Watson Analytics, which is a spin-off. They took a piece of the Watson Analytics piece, the natural language processing, and put it into a package called Watson Analytics. It, again, is a cloud-based program that lets you get quickly into conducting fairly intense analytics without having to do any programming, without having to understand everything you're doing. It's designed for the end user. It's not as comprehensive a program as perhaps some of the others you'll be using in the MSDA program, but it's a great place to start. It went from being introduced in early 2015 to over 500,000 users in no time. So we will provide you again your access to that. You'll be using the professional version. So don't sign yourself up for either of those packages. Now, let me just outline the assignments. There are 5 graded assignments, 6 if you want to count discussion, and I'll say something about that in a minute. And you can see on this chart when the assignments are due. So when it says due, it means due at the end of that week. At the end of that week. So we are at the beginning of week 1. Week 1 will end Saturday, upcoming Saturday, and week 2 will start Sunday and so forth. So the first assignment is due at the end of week 3. And what you'll be doing there is doing a fully framed decision using the Decisions First software. You'll hear more in detail about, of course, each of these assignments as we go forward. Your second assignment, due at the end of week 5, will be your first opportunity to use Watson Analytics, where you'll be doing some data refinement, analysis, and cleansing, which is one of the first things you have to do with any data set you get. You have to take a look at it, look for interesting things, look for outliers, look for areas that need to be changed, perhaps transformations of data distributions, etc., and we'll help you with that. There will also be a complete walkthrough of Watson Analytics at the appropriate time in week 4. Your next assignment, due at the end of week 7, is to build a predictive model with Watson Analytics. So once you've refined your data, once you've cleansed your data, once you've got it in the appropriate shape, the next thing you want to do is what? Well, you'd like to build some predictive models. You know, predictive models say, okay, I understand what's happened so far. Let me see if I can predict with some probability what's likely to happen next, because that's where the real payoff is currently in the world of analytics, being able to anticipate and predict with a certain likelihood what's likely to happen next, and then take either action either to enhance that or prevent that, depending on what it is. So Watson has a very nice built-in piece that will let you do predictive models quite easily. The assignment after that, due in week 9, is where you take and use again Watson Analytics, this time to build a dashboard. It's not as extensive a dashboard as perhaps something you could build with Tableau or will be doing when you take Data610, the visualization course, but it is a pretty impressive dashboard, and it's dynamic. So again, you'll have an opportunity and an assignment to do that. The final assignment, it basically is an opportunity to revisit those Watson assignments and put together one comprehensive assignment as a team. We have the one team assignment or one team project in the course due week 12, which is our final week, where you'll be using the Watson Analytics, all the pieces, and using them on a larger data set. And again, more about that at the appropriate time. And then finally, there's a very small percentage of the course grade, 5%, based on discussion contributions. Now, if you've looked, you notice there are many, or several at least, discussion items each week. The expectation is not that you will contribute something to every one of those, but we want you to contribute to, at least one per week and something significant. Again, the grading on that is somewhat subjective, but basically I and the other professors look for meaningful contributions and meaningful exchanges between students. So good job, Harry, nice work, Sally, good post, Mary, doesn't get you much credit. What we want to see is, okay, maybe your organization has used Watson Analytics. Maybe you have an experience to share, positive or negative. Maybe you're doing something in analytics that's insightful and will help others grasp the importance and the meaning of analytics. Maybe you're still relying on intuitive decision-making, and you can cite and provide some interesting insights as to why that is or isn't working. And so there's many ways to contribute meaningful and in-depth contributions to the discussion items, and that's what I am encouraging, not just a post so that you can say I posted something. And so I spoke before I put the slide up, but there it is. It's designed to contribute to the interactivity. So not only do we expect you to post, but we certainly expect you to respond to some of your fellow classmates' posts. And of course, we always do that in a polite way, but you can disagree. You can say, well, at my organization, we don't do it that way, and we've had success, and here's why. And so details, insights really help experiences, observations, and of course you can put questions there. So this is where the interactivity of the course really helps us to get a good feel, us as professors and you as students, to get a good feel on where everyone is in this world of analytics. You know, we're all at different places and we're all just sort of getting started. This is the early times in the world of analytics and great opportunities. There are a couple of ungraded requirements. Now, requirements means you have to do them, but they're ungraded. The first one, and most of you have already done this, is the Academic Integrity Pledge. The Academic Integrity Pledge is a little pledge that you have to sign up to each and every semester at UMUC, and it basically says you're going to do your own work. You're not going to have any outside help, and what you submit and what you do is your work and your work alone. So be sure to visit the Academic Integrity Pledge link. You can either copy and paste and post it right there in the discussions item, or submit it as in the assignments area, or both. But everybody should get that done by the next day or two, because it really is a way to get you access to all the other materials. So I think probably about 3/4 of my section have already done it. So that's a good start. It only takes about 30 seconds. The second requirement that is ungraded but required is, of course, the Big Data University Watson Analytics Fundamentals course. Big Data University is a creation of IBM, and it's great. They have lots and lots of free courses, including one on Watson Analytics. And the Watson Analytics course is about a 4-hour course. It walks you through all of the pieces of Watson Analytics. It's so good that we thought, why reinvent the wheel and build our own tutorials when we have this one available to us for free? You sign up, you get yourself a Big Data University account, you sign up for the Watson Analytics Fundamentals course, and when you complete that successfully, you'll be awarded a certificate. And what you will do is post a screenshot of that certificate in the appropriate assignment area. You don't need to worry about doing that now. That is due in week 4. I'd rather you focus on decisions first and getting started and doing all the required readings for week 1, and worry about week 4 when week 4 gets here. Again, the other thing is there, as I said earlier, there are some intervening activities where self-assessments are there, like the first week. Some of you have already done this too. We were asking in the course for you to post sort of an analysis of your decision-making style. Ungraded, but interesting. Okay, there are required readings each week. As you know by now, we have decided, UMUC has decided to eliminate all purchased textbooks for the graduate school starting this semester. So you are the first class, the first semester, where you're not required to purchase any textbooks. We are using what we call Open Educational Resources, OERs. That means we've gone out and found resources that are available without cost, that are as good or in some cases better than what a textbook can provide, because they can be updated and they're current. We find new ones, we can change the links. So what we have are the links that we like so far. Now that doesn't mean something better might not come along, so you want to be sure and pay attention to the weekly lesson guides. And what I'm going to do is switch over to the Data610 course. You're looking at, as they say, you are looking live at the Data610 My Section. And of course, once you've logged in, it should look like this. I'm looking at the learner version, which is your version. You can see at the course home, I'm at the course home. Here's the announcements. Here's reminding us about tonight and so forth and so on. And then if you go to content, and this is what you should do each week. Well, first of all, you should check the announcements often. I post anything that changes, whether I find better links or whether I find additional links or whether I just want to remind you of things. I post that in the announcements regularly. So you should try to check the announcements fairly often. However, in the content is where you'll find the lessons each week. So under course content, which appears like this, you look at lesson 1, and here it is. Now, what we have done in addition to eliminating textbooks is to provide a sort of a one-page or a continuous page outline/summary of each lesson. So here it is, Week 1 lesson guidance. If I click on that, it's an HTML page. It'll open up, and what's in there? Well, as you'll see, once it loads up, a brief outline overview of the lesson for the week, and then some details. For example, here are a couple of short vignettes I created on decision making. Now I'm going to cover these again with the lecture for tonight, but just to give you a feel for things, I put a couple of these short little vignettes in here. And if you click on those will play. I'm not going to do it right now because they will play. So you have everything you need right here. You can say, oh, I see. We're going to talk about decision biases and traps this week. And oh, here's a little something Canode had to say about that, and anchoring, and the decoy option, and the misinterpretation. Oh, and here are my required weekly readings. Now, they're also listed down here under references. Up here, they're listed in perhaps the order in which you probably should read them and a little bit about them. One of my favorite lessons, of course, is these articles on Beyond Bias. I mean, we all have biases, and most of us think we don't. But once you read some of these readings, you'll be convinced we do, I think. And then the Deloitte report says, okay, how can analytics sort of help with this? The other article that's not listed there, but is right here, below here, is my favorite all-time article for this kind of material. It's called A Delicate Balance, Organizational Barriers to Evidence-Based Decision-Making. I think when you read this article in particular, you will go, yes, 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 that's what happens in my organization. Almost all of our organizations have biases and, in many cases, barriers to using evidence-based management. Now, 10, 15 years ago, that was fine. Not everybody was even thinking about analytics, maybe even 5 years ago. Now you're going to be overwhelmed by your competitors who are using evidence-based management, or at least that's the case I hope to make over the next 12 weeks or less, because I firmly believe it. So if your organization is still relying on hunch, intuition, gut feel to make decisions, I really do think they're in trouble. So then there's a note. It says there'll be a more extensive live presentation on decision biases. That's what we're going to do tonight. We don't have live presentations every week. Most weeks the lesson is encapsulated within this document for the week. And then activity, this decision-making checklist I mentioned. If you go there, it's a few short questions. You go through and you say, oh, I didn't realize that's where my weaknesses were. I didn't realize those are the things I do well. Okay, and you can deposit your score and any relevant insights. That's one of the discussion items for this week, and it's an interesting one. Okay, so every week, usually on Sunday, the lesson guidance for the week will show up. Why on Sunday? Well, that's when our weeks start, and I don't put all of the lessons available the first week because I don't want people working ahead. It confuses things, and it leads to more problems than good. You're better off to focus on each lesson as it occurs and get it done well. Okay, grading. Let me say a little bit about grading. Again, you know we have 5, 6 counting discussions, assignments. They each have different percentages. Those are available in the assignments area. And the graduate school policy is applying to those. And that says basically that if you do everything well, if you address every task adequately, if you submit your assignment on time, if it doesn't have typos, misspelled words, bad grammar, properly referenced, good formatting, guess what? That is a good solid B. A good solid B, somewhere between 80 to 85. So don't expect if you do those things I just mentioned that you're going to get 100 or even a high 90. In order to achieve something beyond a good solid B, you have to show clear evidence of critical thinking. And everybody says, well, what is that? Well, it depends. Some assignments you can add depth or breadth. If I ask you to build 2 models, maybe you build 5 and you explain each of them. Why are they different? Other assignments, it's a little different. So it's different based on each assignment, but I think you can probably figure that out. And of course, it takes more time. It takes more effort. And so if it's done well, it deserves a higher grade. And those are the ones that do get the higher grades if they do it well. So just adding a lot of volume doesn't necessarily add critical thinking. It has to be insightful. It has to be meaningful. It has to be something that supports your arguments. In other words, it's more work. Now, all of us as professors strive to be as fair and objective as possible. And so a B, I made it sound like, oh, a B. Well, a B is great work. You get Bs throughout the MSDA program, guess what you get at the end? A master's degree in data analytics. So it's an excellent grade. It is the norm for the program. If you have a complaint about a grade or an assignment, you're certainly welcome to push back to your professor about that, and he or she will explain further the grading and certainly take another look at things if necessary. Miscellaneous. Well, the first miscellaneous item I've already mentioned. Read the announcements section every day. I know it says news, but they just changed it in Leo back to announcements, which I prefer. So read the announcements as often as you can. Every day would be ideal. I know everybody's busy, but you might want to take a short glance at that. And then we have many discussion items. We have one that's kind of special. It says, let me have any questions. That one is reserved for if you have a question that you think the answer to which would benefit all, put it there. Of course, we all strive as professors to answer all questions within 24 hours. We also try to be available on weekends to answer questions. And of course, that's the norm. So we will try to do that. Now, if it's a question that just pertains to you or it's something personal or emergency, certainly an email to your professor would be the better approach. And if it's an emergency, a phone call is always allowed. So again, the weekly lesson guidance has the material for the week, an overview, links, readings, requirements, activities, assignments. And so you start there and go through that first. So view the lesson materials early in the week. Don't wait until the last day, of the week to do that. Now, let me just finally finish up this portion by saying here's what you have to do for week one. Certainly you have to do the required readings and or viewings. Sometimes there's videos to view. You have to go ahead and get your access to decisions first, which will be coming from your professor. And as soon as you get that, I would suggest you try and make sure you can log in at least. Again, do not sign yourself up. There are Decisions First video tutorials. The best one to start with is the one shown here in this link. It's Mr. Taylor himself walking you through a very detailed, about 45 minutes long tutorial. There are also written tutorials. There are other video tutorials. And again, I will be doing a walkthrough with a little different slant on things later this week. That's week one, and that's the week that starts today and ends Saturday. Just to give you a little preview about week two. Week two, of course, you're going to be immersed in using Decisions First, so you can get started on that first assignment. By then, you should certainly have logged in. You should certainly be using the tutorials and the videos by week two. Again, as with all software, I don't care what it is, you will find some confusion initially, and then the fog will lift as you practice it, as you try it, as you view the tutorials, as you go back through it. The fog lifts, and all of a sudden you feel very confident with it. Okay, so that's the end of this first presentation. I'm now going to shift over and segue into a little more detail about decision-making biases and traps. If you looked at some of those vignettes that I just showed you that were available in the week one lesson guidance, you've already seen a couple of the little interesting ideas. I've taught decision-making for many, many, many years, because I was in the Air Force for 20 years and I saw such non-evidence-based decision-making. Most of that time there wasn't any alternative. Computers weren't ubiquitous. Data was not available easily, and we couldn't build models, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, there weren't many choices. Now there are. And so I think if people are still relying, as I said, on a more intuitive approach, they're in trouble. And I'm going to try to make my case why. Okay, first, this is the agenda again, the need for good decisions, the biases and traps, and then a little bit more about week two. Okay, now let's back up a little bit and say, okay, we all know about decision making, but why do we need to do it better? Aren't we doing great now? Well, Maybe, maybe not. Some organizations are doing it well. Most are still relying on a combination of feeling their way with analytics and using still much intuitive and experience-based. And as you know, the world is changing so fast that I'm not sure any of that experience-based decision-making or hunch or intuition is adequate. But let me continue. So survey after survey shows that executives say decision-making is an important business skill and getting harder to do. More decisions need to be made. They need to be made more quickly. There's more data, more complexity in every decision. Now, the good news is that becoming a good decision maker is not a skill you're born with. It's a skill that can be developed just like becoming a good athlete. One of my all-time favorite books is called Decision Traps by Russo and Schumacher. I used that for many years at the National Defense University to convince general officers that they too were victims of decision traps. And the way you can do that is just take the little traps that are in that book and spring them on people, because everybody will fall for them. I'll talk a little bit about a couple of those in a minute. So let's go now and say, okay, well, if we need to change our decision-making style, what constitutes a good decision? Many people will say a good decision is one that wins, is one that succeeds, is one that works out well. That is wrong. A good decision is one that best achieves or is anticipated to achieve your objectives. Now, again, you say, what's the difference? Well, I always like to give a personal vignette. I know the football season has started, and I have long been a Redskin fan, so I'm passing on watching them play tonight in order to do this. But let me tell you a personal vignette. I think it was 1983. When they were in the Super Bowl against Oakland. Redskins were 14-point favorites going into that Super Bowl. I wanted to make a bet with a friend of mine. He insisted on giving me 14 points. And I said, well, you must be crazy. We're the favorites. I'll give you the 14 points just to have a bet. He said, no, I'm going to give you the 14 points. Well, I said, geez, I got to take this to prove a point. So I did. As if you're a real football fan, you know that the Redskins got clobbered. And, of course, I lost my bet. Now, people will say, well, you made a bad decision. You know why I didn't? Because if you give me that same exact situation again, guess what I'm going to do? If I'm a 14-point favorite and you want to give me 14 points, I will take it again. I'll take it every single time. So a good decision is not necessarily one that turns out perfect. It's a decision that was made well under the circumstances and is best thought to lead to a good outcome. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes exogenous outside events occur that change things. You could say, boy, this neighborhood has a lot of kids. There's no ice cream trucks around. I'm going to rent an ice cream truck. I'm going to buy ice cream and sell it at double the markup and make a lot of money. And you're driving your truck down the road and lightning strikes your truck, or an announcement is made that ice cream is bad for you, causes cancer or something, and all of a sudden you're out of business. Well, you didn't know all of that when you made the decision. So decisions have to be made on a relative basis, not an absolute basis. I also use one more example, and that is everyone says, why don't we fix Social Security? We all see that it's headed for trouble. It doesn't have enough money, etc. Well, the solutions are there. Here are the solutions. One, you can agree to pay more taxes. Everybody says, no, that's a dumb idea. Two, you can agree to delay your benefits and not take them at 65, 66, wait till you're 75. Everybody says, no, I'm not doing that. Three, you can take less benefits, and everybody says, no, I'm not doing that. Or four, you can die younger. Those are the solutions. We don't like them, and so we say, well, just solve the problem, but don't do any of those stupid things. Well, again, you have to look at decisions on a relative basis. Which of those or combination of those would relatively solve the problem compared to letting it fester and become a disaster? Now, statistics can be helpful. Evidence can be helpful. Data can be helpful in making those decisions. And that's where we are now, where we finally have reached the point where everybody has a lot of data sitting around, some of it not in such great shape, but it can help us figure out with models what is going to happen next, what is the best thing to do. So that's my working definition, and I think it's a good one. Now, Herb Simon won a Nobel Prize for outlining the three phases of decision making. As you can see, the intelligence, design and choice, and the fourth phase was added later, implementation, pretty much aligned with the three themes we have for this course. Frame the decision, which is part of intelligence. Solve the problem with a model, or at least use an analytical approach to help solve the model, which is design and choice. And then implementation, which is that third part, selling it. So we're right in sync with what most people think. Part of that fourth stage is convincing others that what you've done makes sense. You can't walk in there and say, I'm a smart guy or gal, I built a multiple regression model, don't worry, I can't explain it to you, but we ought to do it. Nope, 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 not going to sell. The decision makers, rightly so, will say, what exactly did you do in American? How did you do it? What are the caveats? What is the likelihood it will work? And that's fair. You owe them that. You also have to let others convince you that their perspective has some value. You have to communicate. You have to have an audit trail. Too many decisions are made, they either turn out poorly or well, and nobody has any idea what was going on when we made them. If you're using analytics, you're going to have an audit trail. If the decision turned out poorly, you can go back through that audit trail and say, was it because we left something key out of our decision process, which you should be pinged for, or did something happen that no one could have anticipated, which you certainly can't be held too much accountable for. Unstructured communication, what we call the BOGSAT method, and BOGSAT stands for bunch of guys and gals sitting around together, is often frustrating and a waste of time. People just yell and scream. They all have their own vested interests. They all have their own agendas. So I would advocate against the BOGSAT method that I've seen in action. And of course, iteration is almost always needed. So that's part of that step 4. Now, what makes decision making difficult? We make decisions every day, what to wear to work, what road to take to get to work, when to do this, when to pick up the kids, and so forth. Well, those decisions are easy, and you don't need an analytical model for them. But good decision making for important decisions is much harder, as you know. First of all, we have multiple perspectives. We don't all view the world the same way. And many of those, what we call frames, are legitimate. They're just different. Secondly, we have multiple conflicting objectives. Yes, we'd like to solve Social Security. Yes, we'd like to beat ISIS. Yes, we'd like to have the economy improve. They're not all equally important to people. We have qualitative objectives, which people say, well, you can't measure that. You can't measure improvements in morale or better spirit or anything. Yes, you can. It's difficult, but it can be done. We have nonlinear utilities. Now, what in the heck do we mean by that? Well, if you said I can buy a car for $25,000 that'll go a maximum of 80 miles an hour, or I can pay $50,000 and get a car that will go 160 miles an hour, twice as much, twice as fast, how many people would buy the latter car? Not many, because we don't really need to go faster than 80, or we don't even need to go that fast. So it's not linear. There's no value added. Yes, you've doubled, even if it was less than double the price. Suppose it was only from 25 to 40,000, but you could go twice as fast. You're not going to go that fast. Time compression. We know that everybody wants decisions more quickly, so we've got to be able to build analytical models more quickly. That makes sense. We've got to deal with uncertainty. We can't say we want absolute decisions that we can guarantee will not fail and will solve the problem. And finally, we're all victims of information overload. I said there's a lot of information out there, and that's good. But when it becomes a tsunami of information, it can be overwhelming, and we have to have ways to deal with that. And on top of all those difficulties, guess what we have? Biases. Finally, we're getting to the biases piece. Now, these are biases we all have, and yes, all is capitalized and underlined because I do mean all of us. We can mitigate them, we can ameliorate them, we can overcome them sometimes, but we got to be real careful about it. Now, how do we know about all these biases? Well, I go back a long ways, as I said, teaching decision making, and I think the seminal article, which I like to refer to, is of course G.A. Miller's article called The Magic Number 7 Plus or Minus 2. G.A. Miller did a lot of experiments and showed that people could remember about 5 to 7 things in their head, and that's it. Well, if you have a simple problem where you only have 2 or 3 things, if you're only buying a car based on price, not too bad. Only buying a car, only considering color, not too bad. Only considering whether it has 4 doors, not too bad. But when you're trying to consider multiple competing and conflicting objectives, you get overwhelmed rather quickly. When I taught live classes face-to-face, I often had people sing the 12 Days of Christmas. Everybody was fine up through 5 golden rings. 5 golden rings, 4 calling birds, 3 French hens, 2 turtle doves, partridge, and pear tree. We all had that. After that, there was a serious drop-off. People knew there were swans. They knew there were lords leaping. They knew there were drummers drumming, pipers piping, but they could never remember exactly how many or when they came in. A second example, Snow White and the 7 dwarfs. It's hard for people to remember those 7 dwarfs. And according to legend, Walt Disney originally had 9 dwarfs, but he took out Lefty and Shorty once he read this article. That may or may not be true. Then there's another seminal article written in 1986 that you should read, Towards Intelligent Decision Support Systems, which outlines the biases. I've got them on the next few slides, but I'm not going to go through all of them. But certainly you can get that article from our library at UMUC and refresh yourself on it. It's great. There are books. As I mentioned, the book I like best, Decision Traps by Russo and Schumacher. A more current book would be Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely, who is still doing research on why people make irrational decisions over and over and over. Yes, we make irrational decisions. He thinks they're predictably irrational, which is good because then you can sort of predict they're going to happen and overcome them. Bazerman and Moore's book, which we've used before in this course on judgment and managerial decision making, outlines many, many, many biases and so forth. So there are plenty of articles I can cite and many more. If you'd like to have them, just let me know. So the magic number 7 plus or minus 2, George Miller, Decision Traps by Russo and Schumacher. That was based on 25 years of cognitive research. It said we all make the same decisions. And here they are. These are the 10 in Decision Traps. The first 3 I've highlighted in red because they are just traps dealing with what? Framing. Framing. Poor framing. Plunging in without building a frame. Frame blindness, thinking your frame is the only one that matters. And then losing frame control, letting people add to it and expand, what we call mission creep. Big problems, the biggest ones. And then there's many others. Overconfidence in your judgment, shooting from the hip, groupthink, fooling yourself about feedback. I like the fooling yourself about feedback because invariably if a student gets a C, it's my fault. You will hear the student say, he gave me a C. If a student gets an A, you always hear them say, I earned an A. So you're fooling yourself. You know, whatever grade you get, you earn. It could be an A, it could be a B, it could be something else. But don't fool yourself about feedback. Not keeping track, that's the audit trail. If you don't have an audit trail, it's easy to say, oh, I made a good decision last year, it turned out well. Maybe you just got lucky. Or I made a decision last year and it turned out poorly. I'm never doing that again. Maybe you were victimized by circumstances. You have to have an audit trail. And then finally, you have to go back and audit your decision process. Well, that's a quick summary of Decision Traps. Great book, still in publication. Now, I mentioned the article in 1986, a seminal article called Towards Intelligent DSS. These charts, these next few, I'm not going to even elaborate on, but that article put all the biases, or most of the biases, in a very nice pots, explained them, gave examples. It really is an article. If you've never read it, you ought to download it from the UMUC library and glance through it. And here are some of them outlined. You know, I just made a slide so you'll have some idea, but I'm not going to spend time on it because it's something you should read for yourself. But they break it down to presentation biases, selective perception biases. People filter data in ways that reflect their experience. My goodness, does anybody do that? Well, some people only watch the liberal TV channels. Some people only watch the conservative TV channels because they only want to hear information that reflects their viewpoints. And certainly your expectations can bias those viewpoints and so forth. People seek information consistent with their own views. You know, we're sort of lucky in an election year to be able to see all the decision biases in operation at one time. Frequency biases, ease of recall. We all know that you can recall certain things much more easily than others. There's a real evidence out there that putting things first or last leaves a better impression than the stuff in the middle. The base rate error, the frequency to imply strength of relationship. People say, you know, George Burns lived to be 100. He smoked a lot of cigars every day. He drank a lot of booze. See, you can do that. George Burns is what we call in the analytical business a 3, maybe even 5 sigma outlier. If you try it, it's not going to work. And then finally, heuristics biases, using rules of thumb. You know, we have a lot of rules of thumb out there, and most of these came about because people couldn't build models, so they came up with little hunch and intuition. And then statistical properties. So all of these biases are out there. Gambler's fallacies. You throw 7 sevens in a row at the dice table. People say, oh, the odds of throwing that 8th one are 1,000,000 to 1. No, they're not. The dice don't have a memory. The odds of throwing 8 sevens in a row without throwing any dice is 1,000,000 to 1. But the odds of throwing the 8th 7 after you've thrown 7 is the same as it was when you threw the first one. Ignoring uncertainty. People say, I don't know what's going to happen, so I'm going to leave that out of my model. And then miscellaneous biases. These are all very important biases. Now, Dan Ariely, who's still doing research, I believe he's over at Duke University, is still doing research and updating his book, and he has a website shown here at the bottom where he does a great job with many video vignettes of all of the biases that are in his book. Predictably Irrational. It's really quite good and well worth, again, some of your time. And I'm going to give you a couple of brief examples I took from his book and used in MBA classes that I taught at UMUC. I like to illustrate the anchoring bias. So I took my MBA class back when I was teaching face-to-face in the executive MBA program, and I separate them into 2 groups, and one group gets a piece of paper with this on it. 2 questions. Is the population of Turkey greater or less than 35 million? They can pick whatever they want. They can't look it up on the internet, of course. And then what's your estimate? Well, you hand that to half the people, and they don't read it out loud or anything. And guess what the average answer was? 33 million. Interesting, huh? The other half the class got the following piece of paper. Notice the question slightly different. Is the population of Turkey greater or less than 100 million people? You can pick whichever one you think is true. And then the second part is put down your estimate of the population of Turkey. I guess what people put? 106 million. Now, these are the same people because they're in the same class. And I did this over and over again. This is the average of many classes. Isn't it interesting that you were able to anchor their guess at the second question by putting that first question a certain way? So when I put it at 35 million, I anchored them on that. And they said, well, I don't know how many people are in Turkey, but he asked, is it greater or less than 35 million? I'm going to say it's somewhere around that. Whereas with the second group, they said, I don't know what the population of Turkey, but he said, guess whether it's greater or less than 100 million. It must be somewhere around that. Anchoring. What a terrible thing, and so easy to do. So easy to do. Car dealers do it all the time. Don't pay $50,000 for this car. It's on sale. It's only $43,500. You think, oh my God, what a bargain. Okay, here's another example. This is called the decoy option. Suppose this showed up in your in-mail basket. You can either subscribe to the, by the way, this is a true one, again from Dan Ariely's book, but this is what happened, and so I used it in class too. Internet-only subscription to The Economist, $59 for a year. Print and internet, $125 for the year. And people look at that and say, that's pretty expensive. That's a big jump. So guess what? Most people took the internet only, 68%. And these were MBA students at MIT, by the way. This is his numbers. I did the same thing and got similar numbers. Now, suppose you offer a different option. Internet only for $59, print only for $125, which is, of course, what these were. This one was. No, the print only didn't exist. And print and internet for $125. People say, well, this is crazy. Who in the world would take this? Why would you take print only for $125 when you can get the print and internet for the same price? That must be a bargain. And so guess how many people took it? 84% took option 3, which is the same as option 2 in the first presentation, where only 32% took it. So the decoy option, by putting that bogus option in, convinced a lot more people to jump to this other option. Now, I had this actually happen to me in 2013. I subscribed to Fast Company. I liked the magazine. It's kind of interesting. I got this offer in the mail. 3 years for $10, 2 years for $10, or 1 year for $5. Well, you look at that and say, well, I'd be an idiot to take 2 years for $10 when I can get 3 years for $10. And so I wasn't even thinking of renewing, but I ended up renewing for 3 years. So yes, it worked. It worked. Here's another example of just one of the many biases that's out there. This is the data misinterpretation. I mentioned that we are limited in our ability to deal with amount of data. 5 to 7 things. After that, we get overwhelmed. Well, here's a very, very simple data set. It's not that big a data set. We have 4 sets of data, okay? And each of the sets has 11 pairs, an X and a Y. Now, I can assure you that all this is true, that there's the same number of data pairs in each set, 4 sets, that the mean, the average of the X's in each of the sets is 9, that the average of the Y's in each of the sets is 7.5, that if you were to draw a regression line through each of the sets of data, it would be identical, y equals 3 plus 0.05x. If you were to calculate the standard error of the slope, the t-squared, the sum of the squares, the regression sum of squares, the residual sum of squares, the correlation coefficient, r squared, all would be exactly the same. This is called Anscombe's quartet. It's a very famous data set. Well, that would lead you to think, well, I guess those data sets are pretty much the same. All these statistics come out the same until you graph them. There are the 4 data sets. They're not even close to being the same, and yet all those statistics are the same, which is why we need what? Well, we need a little data visualization, don't we? You get a lot of that in Data610. You've got to be able to handle data differently than looking at rows of numbers, columns of numbers. You've got to have some analytical help to put it in perspective, and this is a good example. Another of my favorites is overconfidence. We all think we know more than we know. And of course, you could get away with that 10, 15 years ago when people couldn't look it up on the internet or couldn't fact check you, but now you can't. We tend to think we're better, faster, smarter. We're like, the prairie home companion where everybody's above average. It's not possible, okay? Some brief examples. This is out of the Russo and Schumacher book, and I won't take a lot of time to explain this, but they basically give you questions, and I've used this many times. You give people 10 questions and ask them to put a range on their answer for each question so that they're 90% certain they've got the right answers. And then you give them the right answers and they're way off, way off. This one was trivia facts. They said put a range. Remember, you're putting an answer in on a number, but you're putting a big range, as big as you want, so that you're 98% sure you've got the right answer. Guess what? 46% correct. Should have been 98% correct. Here you're supposed to be 90% correct, 50% correct. 50%, 79% wrong, and so forth. Scary. Physicians asked to build predictions about whether a patient had pneumonia and make sure you're no wrong more than 0 to 20%, 82% wrong. Scary. It's a simple little trick, not a trick, but a simple little illustration of how people are very prone to thinking they know a lot more than they really do. Now, we have many decision-making approaches to help overcome this. Certainly, mathematical models help. Certainly, intuition shouldn't be totally discarded. It helps you decide what things belong in a problem solution, analytical solution. But don't make the decision using intuition. There are rational models. There's wisdom of crowds, decision support system. We're talking about a lot of these things during the context of the program. So what do models do for you? What's the bottom line? Well, several things. The framing brings order to chaos. You don't want to have a meeting with a dozen people and have a dozen people leave the room with a dozen different ideas of what needs to be done. You want to sit down and build a frame that says, this is what the problem is. These are the key performance indicators that tell us whether we succeeded. These are the key resources we're going to need. This is the type of analytical model we're going to build. These are the people who are going to provide those things. This information comes from a data set. This information is from a regulation. This information is based on Fred's expertise, Mary's intuition, Mary's experience, and that may be necessary, okay? But the framing is important. It helps you better understand the issues. Once you've got it framed, you can look at it and say, oh, I see what we're doing. It reduces overlooked items because the frame needs to be thorough and have everything in it, okay? It codifies your thinking. Instead of some vague generality like do good and avoid evil, or let's try to improve our business, You get down to specifics. You get an audit trail. Your decision's explainable because you can show that frame at first and say, here's where we started, boss. This is exactly what we're going to do. These were the pieces. This was the analytical model we used, etc. And that way you can justify your decision. So I think it's extremely important. And I think if you do the readings for the week, you'll agree. So this is that little quiz that I'm asking you to complete and post your score. We're not trying to embarrass anyone. We're not trying to expose anyone or anything. We're just trying to get an assessment. Where are you? None of us are perfect on all this. So if you answer these very, very honestly, you'll find out the areas where you're good and the areas where perhaps you need a little more help. This is kind of the grading system. Okay, we'd all love to be up here at 80, but, we're not. And then, of course, there are some sections in this article which will give you some advice on how to do better. Okay, so there it is. Improve your problem. Okay, so what are we going to talk about next week? Well, again, when that lesson shows up this Sunday, you'll see another miniature presentation from me about more about how analytics can help overcome these many, many, many biases I've pointed out tonight. So that's one of the things you'll see in week 2. I'll try to provide some more solid evidence how analytics can help overcome, mitigate, ameliorate these biases. You'll also be spending week 2 enmeshed in decisions first, starting to build your models that are due at the end of week 3. So you should have that information. Okay, and now I'm going to stop and say we have what we call office hours if there are questions. And so let me switch back over to, whoops, I'm going to lock. I'm going to switch back over to, I'm going to switch back over to this. Where's my, what happened here? Stop sharing. Okay. We're back. I see a couple of questions. Somebody said they're not seeing their, a good question. Somebody said, just to be sure, the week officially starts on Sunday, correct? I took a previous class at UMUC and the week ended Sunday night. Well, that's technically correct. This weekend, Sunday midnight. I always put my lessons, I make the lesson for the upcoming week available midnight or even earlier on Saturday because I know many people spend their weekends sort of looking to get a head start on the upcoming lesson. So I think technically you're correct. It does end on Sunday midnight. In fact, the assignments are due midnight Sunday of weeks 3, 5, 7, 9, and 12. So, yes. We're trying to make sure, again, since this is the first course for everyone, we want to make sure that we're up and running, that we eliminate as many of the administrative kinds of questions as possible because we want to delve very quickly into content. Obviously, the content is where the real gist of your learning experience is, but we have to overcome and make sure we don't have any serious or even annoying administrative hitches and glitches. So, those things do happen. Just be patient. Be sure to ask your instructor if you're having trouble with something, getting access to it, or something's not showing up. Occasionally, a link will go bad. Remember, these are all outside links, meaning they're not from textbooks. They're on the web. Occasionally, we will find something perhaps better than the link you had and substitute that. But hopefully, before you get to that lesson, we'll try to backdoor you and put it in afterwards. I try to provide additional readings for any students who would like to say, oh, I want a little more depth on that, because we are going fast. Remember, this is a 6-credit course, 6 graduate credit course. Most graduate programs, you only take 3 graduate credits over 12 to 15 weeks. You're getting 6 graduate credits over that same 12-week period. So the main thing to do is put in the requisite time, not fall behind, ask questions, and hopefully learn a lot and enjoy it. I mean, I know it's going to be rough because, time-wise is the big thing. People have families, they have jobs, they have obligations. You want to be sure and let your professor know if you've got a personal problem or if you're going to, be out of town or you got ill or something, because we can make allowances for assignments, minor allowances for assignments if we know in advance. Let me see here. Somebody, let me scroll up. I guess I'm missing some of these questions. When you say to update your bio, do you mean the About Me section? Yeah, the About Me section. That's what I meant. I may have called it the wrong name. Somebody says, can you advise which week the group assignment that is due in week 12 will be assigned? I usually don't assign groups until fairly far down the program, and I let Leo do it. Our software has a way of assigning groups randomly. I think the world is obviously moving towards virtual groups, and so we want you to have the experience of working towards virtual groups in this course. And so, yes, it does pose some problems and concerns, but usually there's no need to worry about the group assignment until you get well down the course, maybe weeks 8 or 9, and then it'll be fine. I hope this has been helpful. You know, we try to make sure that we get, again, past any administrative hurdles early on. Again, has anyone else expressed concern seeing course content that you discussed? I was unable to see course content on the left side until a few moments ago. I think usually course content should show up. I mean, it used to be it wouldn't show up until you'd done the academic integrity pledge, but I thought we had removed the requirement for that to see the course content. So if you're still having a problem with that, send me, if you're in my class, send me an email, and I think the person expressing that is in my class. Send me an email, and or talk to the Leo help desk. If others are having problems and we have a bigger problem, then we need to fix that. What size are the groups in terms of quantity? I like to keep my groups around 3. Sometimes we have to go 4 because we don't have numbers divisible by 3. But 3, certainly no smaller than that. It's not going to be 2, 3, and sometimes 4. Okay, well, I've spent a little over an hour, 1 hour and 1 minute, and, well, 1 hour and 2 minutes. So I said it'd be about an hour. Again, I hope this has been helpful. Again, I will post a link to the recording in my section shortly after I get it back tonight, and I'll send that link to the other professors to post in their sections for anyone who either wants to hear it again or for those who were unable to attend tonight. Okay, thanks. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording to be sure